A police officer returned to Cleveland after years of duty, carrying nothing but determination and the fragile hope of starting anew. At his side walked Max, his steadfast German shepherd, while in his arms he held the trust of a little girl who had already lost more than most could bear. But instead of open arms, he found betrayal waiting, relatives casting the child out into the freezing snow, their laughter as cold as the night wind. With nowhere to turn, a weary officer, a broken child, and their faithful dog began a journey through injustice, resilience, and the hidden mercies of God. What happened next would test the strength of love, courage, and faith, proving that miracles often arrive when we least expect them. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments so we can see how far this story travels. And if you believe no child should ever face the world alone, hit that subscribe button, because this story may restore your faith in family, hope, and second chances. Snowflakes drifted lazily from a dull gray sky over Cleveland, Ohio, the kind of winter afternoon that pressed silence onto every roof and muffled the sounds of the city. The streets were rimmed with dirty slush, and in the neighborhood of aging houses where the Parkers had once lived, a bitter wind curled around the corners of brick walls and rattled loose shutters. It was here, in front of the large but neglected two-story house at the end of a cul-de-sac, that the story of Emily Parker began anew. Emily was a girl of 7 years, small for her age, with a thin body made thinner by grief. Her light brown hair, tangled from neglect, framed a pale face where two wide hazel eyes carried the raw redness of too many tears. Once she had been lively, cheerful, always trailing behind her parents with laughter, but now she was shivering in a threadbare winter coat several sizes too big, clutching against her chest an old teddy bear whose fur was worn thin. That bear had been her mother's last gift before the fire, and Emily held onto it with all the strength of her small fingers, as if it were the last anchor keeping her in this world. Standing on the porch was Monica Harper, Emily's aunt, the younger sister of her late father. Monica was in her late 30s, a tall, thin woman whose sharp cheekbones and heavily painted face gave her an appearance both striking and cold. She had long black hair streaked with dye, teased into loose waves, and she wore a short black dress beneath a garish red fur-trimmed coat that seemed more suited to a nightclub than to a funeral. Monica had always cared about appearances, more interested in being admired than in nurturing those around her. Years of bitterness toward her brother's success, toward the responsibility of family she never wanted, had hardened her heart, leaving her voice shrill and her gestures impatient. Today her eyes were smeared with dark eyeliner that made them look harder still as she dragged a suitcase onto the porch. Following behind was her husband, Frank Harper, a man in his early 40s who had once been considered handsome, but now seemed worn down by life. He was tall yet slightly hunched, his frame thin, with prematurely white hair that spoke not of age, but of constant anxiety. His pale blue eyes darted nervously as though he were always waiting to be scolded, and he rarely spoke his mind. Years under Monica's domineering control had left him spineless, echoing her words like a shadow rather than standing against her cruelty. When Monica kicked open the suitcase, Emily's clothes tumbled onto the wet pavement, some dresses stained with ash from the fire, others smeared with dirt. The teddy bear slipped from Emily's arms and landed in a puddle, and she gasped, scrambling to rescue it. "Get out!" Monica snapped, her voice cutting through the frosty air. "This house isn't yours anymore. You don't belong here." Emily fell to her knees on the icy tiles, clutching the bear, her tears hot against the winter chill. "Please, Aunt Monica," she begged, her voice trembling. "I don't have anyone else. Please let me stay. I'll be good. I'll do anything." Monica bent down, her painted lips curling into a sneer. "You? From the day you were born, you've been nothing but misfortune. If it weren't for you, my brother would still be alive. If it weren't for you, your mother wouldn't be gone. You brought ruin to this family, and I won't let you curse us anymore." Emily shook her head, confused, guilt rushing through her fragile body, though she could not understand how she could be blamed. Behind Monica, Frank crossed his arms, his voice carrying mockery instead of compassion. "She's been spoiled all her life. Now she thinks everyone should feel sorry for her just because she's lost her parents. Another mouth to feed is nothing but trouble. Let her learn how cruel the world really is." Emily clutched the bear tighter, whispering, "I don't want to be trouble. I don't have anywhere else to go." But Monica's heart remained like stone. With a sudden twist, she grabbed the garden hose and turned the valve. A jet of freezing water struck Emily, soaking her coat and hair until her small frame shook violently from the cold. Emily cried out, curling into herself, the bear pressed tightly against her chest. Monica laughed, the sound harsh and triumphant. "There. Wash away the misfortune. You are nothing but filth, Emily Parker." From behind the fence, neighbors gathered quietly. An older woman with a scarf pulled tightly around her face whispered, "Poor child." Another man shifted uncomfortably, his breath fogging in the cold air. A younger woman looked as if she might step forward, but Monica spun toward them, eyes blazing. "This is my house." "No one tells me what to do." Shamed into silence, the neighbors stepped back, murmuring amongst themselves, then slowly dispersed, unwilling to confront her further. Emily remained kneeling on the wet ground, her thin shoulders hunched, her teeth chattering as icy water streamed down her back. She clung to her teddy bear, now dripping and muddy, and her sobs were drowned by the hiss of the hose. Every cruel glance from her aunt, every mocking laugh from her uncle, every silence from the neighbors cut deeper into her heart than the cold water ever could. Finally, Monica shut off the hose, flicking it aside as though it were a whip she had grown tired of. "Pick up your rags and get out. I never want to see your face again," Frank added with disdain. "Go on, jinxed child. You've got no one left to cling to." Emily lifted her tear-filled eyes, scanning the street desperately, as if searching for a miracle, some hand that might reach out to her. All she found was the winter air, the drip of melting snow from the eaves, and the emptiness that stretched before her. And then it came, the sudden roar of a car engine at the gate. Headlights flared across the yard, cutting through the gloom. A police vehicle rolled to a stop, its tires crunching over the icy slush. The neighbors who had been retreating froze, turning back with wide eyes. From the car stepped Officer Daniel Carter, a man in his mid-30s. Daniel was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark brown hair cut short with a touch of silver at the temples that made him look older than his years. His hazel eyes were steady, often unreadable during work, but softened when he looked at children. His face carried the scruff of a beard, as if he rarely cared for vanity, and his dark blue police jacket was dusted with snow. Daniel had served as a patrol officer in Cleveland for nearly a decade, known for his firm but compassionate approach. He had grown up in the same city, the son of a factory worker and a nurse, and had seen enough hardship to shape him into someone who believed justice meant protecting those too weak to protect themselves. The death of a fellow officer years ago in a domestic abuse call had left him more cautious, more solemn, but also more determined never to turn away from a cry for help. At his side trotted Max, a 6-year-old German shepherd. Max had a muscular frame and a thick coat of black and tan fur, with sharp amber eyes that gleamed with intelligence. Once trained as a K9 for search and rescue, Max had been Daniel's partner for years, and together they had formed an unbreakable bond. The dog's ears pricked forward, and a low growl rumbled in his throat as he saw the trembling girl and the man reaching for her arm. Daniel's gaze swept the scene, instantly understanding more than words could tell. The child in rags, the dripping hose, the scattered belongings, the neighbors looking away in shame. His jaw tightened, and he strode forward, his boots leaving firm prints in the snow. Max moved with him, his presence commanding. Frank, trying to appear bold, grabbed Emily's arm again, but Max lunged with a snarl, forcing him to release her in panic. The neighbors gasped, whispering, "That's Officer Carter, and that's Max. If they're here, something's about to change." Monica's red lips parted, but for once no words came, and Emily, still clinging to her sodden bear, lifted her tear-stained face toward the man who had just arrived, a faint spark of hope flickering in her eyes. The snow continued to fall as Officer Daniel Carter closed the back door of his patrol vehicle, where Emily sat trembling, soaked through, clutching her bear. He drove slowly, the wipers brushing aside thick flakes, the hum of the engine filling the silence that neither he nor the girl seemed ready to break. Max lay in the back beside her, his great head resting on his paws, amber eyes flicking between Emily and the dark streetlights sliding past. When the car finally pulled up in front of Daniel's modest home on the outskirts of Cleveland, Emily's eyes widened. The small brick house with its slanted roof and smoke curling from the chimney looked nothing like the large but loveless mansion she had just been cast out of. Here, the porch light glowed warmly, not harshly, and the snow-laden bushes framed the doorway like two quiet guardians. Daniel parked, climbed out, and opened the back door. He extended his hand, but Emily hesitated before taking it. She was shivering, her lips pale, her thin body dwarfed by the coat hanging on her shoulders. Daniel gently helped her down, and Max leapt beside them, shaking off snow. Emily instinctively crouched, placing a trembling hand on the dog's neck. Max stood still, then leaned into her touch, letting out a low sigh that felt almost like reassurance. For the first time since her ordeal, Emily's tears slowed. Inside the house, the air smelled faintly of coffee and pine wood from the crackling fireplace. The space was small but tidy polished wooden floors, a dark leather couch, shelves lined with old books, a pair of framed photographs of a young man in uniform with his arm around a woman. Emily's eyes lingered on those pictures, though she said nothing. Daniel noticed and quickly set her wet coat aside, motioning toward the couch. "I'll get you something dry," he said softly, his deep voice measured, unused to comforting words. From the kitchen doorway stepped a woman in her late 50s. She was of medium build, her salt and pepper hair pulled back into a bun, and she wore a simple navy cardigan over a plaid dress. This was Linda Carter, Daniel's mother, who had moved in after her husband's death to help her only son balance the strains of long police shifts and an empty house. Linda had once worked as a school librarian, and her gentle nature was tempered by decades of dealing with unruly children and a lifetime of small-town hardships. She had kind brown eyes, though tonight they narrowed with concern as she saw the dripping child standing awkwardly in the living room. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "What on earth happened?" "This is Emily," Daniel replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "She needs a safe place tonight." Linda's eyes softened immediately. She stepped forward, kneeling slightly to meet the girl's eye level. "Hello, sweetheart." "I'm Linda. You must be freezing." She guided Emily toward the hallway without pressing her with questions. Moments later, she returned with a set of clean pajamas, plain cotton with small blue flowers, and a towel. "Go change in the bathroom, dear. You'll feel better." Emily hesitated, then gave a tiny nod, still clutching her bear. While Emily changed, Linda turned to her son, her brows furrowed. "She looks half-starved, Danny." "Who is she really?" Daniel explained in low tones about Monica and Frank, the hose, the neighbor's silence. His jaw clenched as he spoke, anger flickering in his hazel eyes. Linda listened, her lips pressed tight, and finally said, "You did right to bring her here, but this is no small matter." When Emily returned, the pajamas slightly loose on her thin frame, Linda had set a bowl of chicken soup on the table. Emily sat down cautiously, Max curling up near her feet as though guarding her. She ate slowly at first, then more quickly as hunger overcame her shyness. Linda smiled faintly, but noticed the way Emily still held her bear with one hand, as though afraid it might vanish if she let go. The evening passed quietly. Daniel sat across from Emily, watching her with a mixture of worry and uncertainty. He had rescued children before, delivered them to social workers or hospitals, but never had he brought one home. Max occasionally raised his head, ears flicking at every creak of the old house, before settling back down. Later, when Linda guided Emily toward the small guest bedroom, the child froze at the threshold. The bed was neatly made, the quilt patterned with faded sunflowers. Emily set the bear on the pillow, but immediately snatched it back, shaking her head. She whispered, "I can't sleep alone." Linda was about to reassure her when Max padded into the room and jumped lightly onto the rug beside the bed. He circled once and lay down, his amber eyes locking onto Emily's. Slowly, Emily climbed into bed, pressing her back against the wall and clutching the bear. She extended one small hand toward Max, who placed his warm muzzle against it. Only then did she close her eyes. The night deepened. Outside, wind howled against the windows. Emily tossed fitfully, murmuring words broken by sobs. "Mom, Dad, don't leave me." Daniel, restless himself, stood at the door and watched. His memory flashed to years earlier, when his partner had died during a call that went horribly wrong. The guilt of not arriving fast enough had carved lines into his face, making him wary of promises he might not keep. But seeing the frail child twisting in nightmare, he stepped forward, sitting on the edge of the bed. He placed a steady hand on her small one, whispering, "You're safe here. I won't let anyone hurt you." Gradually her breathing eased, though sweat beaded on her forehead. Daniel remained there until dawn painted the snow outside pale gold. When morning came, Emily woke weak and feverish. Her forehead burned hot, her cheeks flushed. Linda, worried, pressed a damp cloth against her skin. "She's running a fever," she muttered. Daniel called into the station, his tone resolute. "I can't make my shift today." His captain was displeased, but Daniel hung up before guilt could sway him. As Emily dozed, Linda brewed herbal tea while Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. Max lay at his feet, occasionally lifting his head to whine softly, sensing the tension. The dog had been Daniel's partner through collapsed buildings, missing persons, even violent arrests. Yet now in this quiet house, Max seemed to understand that his duty was no longer chasing criminals but guarding the small life in the next room. By afternoon, Emily's fever eased slightly. She woke to find Daniel seated nearby with a book unopened in his lap. His hazel eyes looked tired, but when she stirred, he smiled faintly. "You scared us," he said gently. I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice a rasp. "There's nothing to be sorry for." His tone was firm, almost protective. Emily hesitated before asking, "Will you send me back?" Daniel shook his head immediately. "No. You're safe here," Max barked once, as if to confirm. The sound made Emily smile weakly, the first hint of light in her eyes since she had arrived. She reached down to stroke the dog's thick fur. "He's warm," she whispered. "That's Max," Daniel said. "He's been with me a long time. He knows how to look after people." Emily nodded, her small hand still tangled in the shepherd's coat. For the first time since the fire that had taken her parents, she let her eyelids close, not out of exhaustion, but from a faint sense of peace. The day waned, snow piling against the windows. In the living room, Daniel and Linda spoke quietly about the future. Linda worried about the legal tangle ahead, about Monica and Frank's likely retaliation. Daniel knew she was right, but for tonight, none of that mattered. Upstairs, a 7-year-old orphan slept at last with Max at her side, no longer alone in the dark. The snow had stopped falling by the following morning, leaving the city of Cleveland coated in a shimmering blanket that reflected pale sunlight. Children trudged through icy sidewalks with backpacks slung across their shoulders, their laughter cutting through the sharp winter air. Emily Parker, however, walked silently between Daniel Carter and his German shepherd, Max. She wore a wool scarf tucked high around her chin, her small hand clutching the strap of her school bag, the teddy bear hidden inside like a secret talisman. It was her first day back at school since the tragedy, and each step felt heavier than the snow. Daniel had arranged to drop her off before heading briefly to the precinct. He knelt in front of her at the school gate, his hazel eyes steady but soft. "You'll be okay," he said. "Max and I will come right after class. If anything happens, tell your teacher." Emily nodded faintly, eyes downcast, and shuffled through the gate. Max whined, reluctant to leave, but obeyed Daniel's command to heel. Inside the schoolyard, the noise of children running and shouting made Emily shrink back. Whispers followed her almost immediately. "That's the orphan," a boy hissed. "They say her parents died because of her." Another girl giggled. "She carries that ragged teddy bear like it's magic." Emily's ears burned, her grip tightening on her bag. The classroom was warm but stifling. Her homeroom teacher, Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, stood at the front. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slender, with chestnut hair tied neatly back and a pair of round glasses perched on her nose. Eleanor carried herself with quiet authority, her posture upright, her gaze calm but penetrating. Having lost her husband in a car accident years earlier, she had rebuilt her life with resilience, channeling her grief into compassion for the children she taught. She noticed Emily at once, her expression softening. "Good morning, Emily," she said warmly, guiding her to an empty desk near the window. At first, the lesson passed quietly, but during recess, trouble began. A boy named Kyle, broad-shouldered for his age, with messy blonde hair and a smirk that made his intentions clear, leaned over and yanked Emily's teddy bear from her bag. "Look, everyone, the orphan still sleeps with her rag," he taunted. Laughter erupted around him. Emily lunged forward, tears brimming. "Give it back," she pleaded, her voice trembling. Another girl, Lacey, tall and sharp-eyed with braided hair, snickered. "Do you think hugging that thing will bring your mommy back?" Pathetic. Emily froze, her small hands shaking, humiliation tightening her chest. The commotion drew Eleanor's attention. She stepped forward, her voice cutting like a blade. "Enough! The laughter died instantly. She extended her hand, her gaze fixed on Kyle. His smirk faltered, and with a red face, he returned the bear. Eleanor knelt beside Emily, resting a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You have nothing to be ashamed of. That teddy bear is love. It belongs to you." Emily clutched it against her chest, her tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Later, during lunch, Eleanor sat beside Emily under a tree in the courtyard. The wind rattled the bare branches above them, scattering frost. She handed Emily a small notebook with a soft cover. "Some things are hard to say," she said, her voice low, "but you can write them. Let these pages carry what you cannot." Emily stared at the notebook, hesitant, then opened it with trembling fingers. On the first page she scrawled unevenly, "Today someone protected me." Eleanor smiled, though she didn't read further, and left the notebook in Emily's care. Meanwhile, across town, rumors spread like wildfire. In the small market near Daniel's neighborhood, 2 women huddled near crates of apples. "They say Officer Carter took her in only for the inheritance," one whispered. "That girl brings bad luck, Miss So. Look what happened to her parents." The other nodded solemnly. Words carried quickly in such communities, and by afternoon, Daniel was already hearing murmurs in the precinct. Colleagues exchanged sidelong glances, some sympathetic, others skeptical. One officer muttered, "Carter's playing with fire, bringing that child into his home." Daniel clenched his jaw but said nothing, choosing instead to focus on his paperwork. That evening, when he picked Emily up, he noticed her silence. She walked with her head down, Max pressing close as if sensing her unease. In the car, the silence grew heavier. Finally, Emily whispered, her voice so faint he almost missed it. "Uncle Daniel, do you also think I bring bad luck?" The question cut through him like ice. He pulled the car to the side of the road and turned to face her. Her hazel eyes, mirroring his own, shimmered with fear. For a moment, memories of his partner's death rushed back, the guilt, the whispers he had endured then. But he reached out, steadying his voice with effort. "No, Emily. You are not bad luck. You are the greatest blessing that ever came into my life." Tears welled in her eyes, disbelief and longing colliding. "Really?" she whispered. "Really," he said firmly. "You are not alone anymore. You have me, and you have Max." At the sound of his name, Max let out a single bark, tail thumping against the seat. Emily laughed through her tears, a fragile but genuine sound. She leaned forward and hugged Daniel tightly, burying her face in his coat. He held her carefully, his own eyes burning. When they arrived home, Linda greeted them at the door, her expression questioning, but Daniel simply nodded. He didn't need to explain. Emily went straight to the fireplace, where Max lay waiting, and curled up beside him. She began writing again in her notebook, this time her letters steadier. "Maybe I'm not unlucky. Maybe I'm safe here." That night, as snow returned to the Cleveland streets, Daniel stood at the window, watching the flakes drift down. He thought of the whispers in town, of the hostility that Monica and Frank might yet bring, of the legal battle sure to come. But when he looked back and saw Emily asleep on the couch with Max's head resting on her lap, he knew one thing with certainty. Whatever storms lay ahead, he would not let them take her away. The winter wind blew across Cleveland with a low howl that rattled windows and swept dead leaves down narrow alleys. While Emily Parker settled into her fragile new routine with Daniel and Max, far across town, her Aunt Monica Harper sat at a polished oak desk, her crimson nails tapping impatiently against a glass of half-finished wine. She was dressed in a fitted charcoal dress and a silver necklace that caught the light each time she moved. Though attractive at first glance, her beauty was edged with severity, her smile too sharp, her eyes too cold. Monica had always envied her late brother's success, and now, left only with debts and a crumbling reputation, envy had hardened into desperation. Frank Harper slouched across from her, his thin frame bent forward as if his shoulders carried the weight of years of silent submission. His prematurely white hair stuck up in tufts, his wrinkled shirt buttoned unevenly. He had once been a man with ambition, but years under Monica's control had stripped him of resolve. He rubbed his forehead nervously, muttering, "We can't keep this house much longer, Monica. The bills are piling up. The bank keeps calling." Monica shot him a withering glance. "Don't talk to me about weakness. There's still a way. Richard's assets should have been ours. That girl shouldn't be the one to inherit." Frank shifted uncomfortably. "She's still our niece." His voice trailed off when Monica's eyes narrowed dangerously. He remembered all too well the humiliation of being dismissed in public by her and the sting of her scorn when he dared question her. "What are you planning?" he asked reluctantly. Monica opened a drawer and pulled out a stack of papers, each page marked with crude signatures that imitated her brother's. "We create a will. Richard leaves everything to me. By the time anyone questions it, the courts will have no choice but to recognize it." Frank's hands trembled as he touched the edge of the forged papers. "This could land us in prison if someone finds out." "That's why no one will," Monica snapped. "We just need the right lawyer, someone discreet, someone who doesn't mind bending rules for the right price." The right lawyer arrived the next afternoon at a dimly lit cafe on the edge of town. His name was Victor Harris, a man in his early 50s with thinning black hair combed straight back and a face marked by the deep lines of both age and cynicism. He wore an immaculate gray suit, his tie knotted perfectly, and his briefcase gleamed like polished obsidian. His eyes, however, betrayed his nature, sharp, cold, and calculating, like a man who had long ago stopped weighing morality and measured only profit. Victor had once been a promising attorney, but years of shady dealings and quiet cover-ups had pushed him into the shadows of the legal world. Monica greeted him with forced charm. "Mr. Harris, thank you for meeting us." Victor's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Your message intrigued me. You claim there are assets you have been denied. Assets belonging to your late brother Frank fidgeted with his cup of coffee, unable to meet the lawyer's eyes. Monica, however, leaned forward, her red lips curling into a smile that masked the venom underneath. "We have a document. We only need it to look legitimate." She slid the forged will across the table. Victor studied it with detached calm, tapping his finger along the signature line. "The handwriting is clumsy. If a competent attorney examines this, they will notice. But, with a few adjustments, and if filed quickly, it could pass. My fee, of course, will not be small." Frank swallowed, but Monica's eyes glimmered. "Name your price." Victor leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Half of the first installment of inheritance, transferred to an account of my choosing. And silence. If anyone breathes a word of this, you will be on your own." Frank's face went pale, but Monica nodded without hesitation. "Done." While this dark pact was being sealed, life in Daniel's home carried on in fragile warmth. Emily sat curled by the fire, sketching clumsy drawings in the notebook Eleanor had given her. Max lay sprawled beside her, occasionally nudging her hand for attention. She had begun to write small notes each day, short sentences about safety, warmth, and fleeting happiness. Linda Carter often peeked in, her heart aching as she saw the child scribbling so intently. Yet Daniel sensed unease. One evening, as snow swirled outside, Max stiffened suddenly, his ears pricking. He barked sharply and lunged toward the door. Daniel rose instantly, his instincts honed by years on the force. Stepping outside, he caught a fleeting shadow darting down the street. He gave chase, but the figure melted into the night, leaving behind only a cigarette butt still glowing faintly. Picking it up with a gloved hand, he sniffed the acrid scent of gasoline on the filter. His stomach clenched. Someone had been watching the house. That night, while Emily slept upstairs, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his mother. Linda looked weary, her kind face lined with worry. "Do you think it's them? Monica and Frank?" Daniel frowned, his jaw tight. "I wouldn't put it past them. If they're desperate enough, they might try anything." Linda placed her hand over his. "Then you have to be careful." "For Emily's sake." "For all of us," Daniel nodded, his eyes dark. Max, lying at his feet, let out a low growl as if in agreement. The storm gathering outside was not just in the winter sky, but in the hearts of those who would stop at nothing for greed. And while Emily clung to her bear, beginning to feel hope once more, the shadows of betrayal and danger crept ever closer, threatening to steal away the fragile peace she had found. The morning of the trial dawned gray and bitterly cold, snow drifting across the steps of the Cleveland courthouse like a veil. The building itself, an imposing structure of pale stone columns and tall arched windows, stood as both fortress and theater where truth and lies would collide. Inside, the hall buzzed with voices, journalists, neighbors, and curious citizens who had heard whispers of betrayal, forged wills, and a little girl caught in the storm. Emily Parker clung tightly to her teddy bear as she walked through the heavy doors beside Officer Daniel Carter. Emily wore a simple navy dress and wool coat, her small frame almost swallowed by the thick fabric, but her eyes, though nervous, carried a faint strength born of recent weeks. Daniel, dressed in a dark suit that accentuated his broad shoulders, kept a protective hand on her back. His jaw was tight, his hazel eyes scanning the crowd for hostility. At his side trotted Max, his muscular German shepherd, wearing a plain service harness. Though dogs were rarely allowed in courtrooms, Daniel had received special permission after Emily's panic at the thought of facing her aunt alone. Max's presence steadied her. His amber eyes glowed with a calm vigilance that no human words could match. In the plaintiff's section, Daniel's old college friend and trusted ally James Carter prepared the files. James, in his early 50s, was a seasoned attorney with graying hair at his temples and wire-rimmed glasses perched on his nose. His demeanor was calm, meticulous, and patient, though his blue eyes carried a steel edge when confronting injustice. Years of practicing law had weathered him, but they had also made him a craftsman with words, a man who valued truth even when it was buried under layers of deceit. Across the room sat Monica Harper and her husband Frank. Monica was dressed to impress in a midnight blue dress, pearls strung elegantly around her neck, her dark hair curled to frame her sharp features. She smiled at the judge and jury with a performance practiced in the mirror, the picture of the grieving aunt. Yet beneath the polish, her eyes betrayed a flicker of fear, for she knew the stakes were high. Frank sat beside her, his oversized suit wrinkled, his pale face drawn tight, his hands twisted nervously in his lap, sweat already collecting at his temples. He looked less like a man defending rights and more like one bracing for a storm. At the defense table was Victor Harris, the shady lawyer they had hired. Victor's immaculate gray suit gleamed under the overhead lights, and his black briefcase rested neatly beside his chair. His slicked back hair and cold, assessing eyes lent him an air of confidence that unnerved even Monica. Victor had built his career not on integrity but on manipulation, and he relished the spotlight of this courtroom where he believed money and performance could bend perception. The judge presiding was Harold Whitaker, a man in his early 60s with a sturdy build and hair as white as snow. His face was deeply lined, his stern brown eyes scanning the courtroom with the patience of someone who had seen every trick in the book. Whitaker was known for his intolerance of theatrics and his fierce defense of children's rights, a reputation that brought a murmur of reassurance among the spectators who sympathized with Emily. When the gavel struck, silence fell. The defense spoke first. Victor Harris rose with smooth precision, holding up the forged will as if it were gospel. His voice boomed, resonant and confident, weaving a story of Monica's devotion to her niece, of Daniel's supposed exploitation, of a poor child's inheritance being stolen by a manipulative police officer. Monica dabbed at the corners of her eyes with a lace handkerchief, nodding solemnly, playing the role of a misunderstood guardian. Some members of the audience shifted uncertainly, the show convincing on the surface. But then James Carter rose. His calm voice, steady and clear, began dissecting the document with surgical precision. He projected copies of Richard Parker's genuine signatures on the courtroom screen, pointing out inconsistencies in the forged version. Richard always underscored his name with a short, firm line, James explained, his finger tracing the projection. But here, he tapped the forged will. We see an unnaturally long stroke, ending with hesitation. This is not his hand. This is fraud. Murmurs rippled through the room, doubt creeping into the minds of the spectators. Then came the true turning point. From the gallery stepped Teresa Mendoza, the family's old housekeeper who had once vanished after the fire. Teresa was in her 60s, slender, her gray hair tied neatly, her face lined not only by age but by years of quiet suffering. She carried herself with dignity, her dark eyes shimmering with both sorrow and resolve. Placing a small tape recorder on the witness stand, she pressed play. The sharp voices of Monica and Frank filled the room, Monica's venom declaring Emily a burden, Frank's weak protest drowned by his wife's fury. The recording was undeniable. Monica's painted smile faltered, Frank's face drained of color. The audience gasped, whispers rising like waves. Victor Harris leapt to his feet, objecting, claiming the audio could have been doctored, but Judge Whitaker silenced him with a sharp glare. The authenticity will be examined, but this court will not dismiss first-hand testimony without cause, the judge declared. The tension thickened when the judge called Emily to the stand. The little girl's steps were slow, her teddy bear clutched tightly, her wide eyes darting nervously across the courtroom. Max padded beside her, his head high, his steady presence earning a soft murmur of sympathy from the gallery. Standing on the platform, Emily trembled. Victor leaned forward with a smile that was more predator than kind. "Tell us, Emily," he said with false gentleness. "Who do you really have in this world besides your Aunt Monica?" The words echoed the cruel taunts she had endured at school, the whispers of neighbors, the sneers of her aunt. For a moment, Emily froze. Then she turned her eyes to Daniel, who sat watching her, his hazel gaze steady and filled with love. Her small voice rose, clear despite the tears. "I have Daniel. I only have Daniel." Silence flooded the courtroom, heavy and absolute. A few people wiped their eyes. Daniel pressed his hand against his face, his shoulders shaking. Even Judge Whitaker's stern expression softened for a moment. Before the defense could recover, another witness stepped forward, a middle-aged engineer named Robert Lane, who had once serviced the fire alarm system in Richard Parker's home. Robert was tall, broad-shouldered, with rough hands and a graying beard. His voice carried the weight of a working man's honesty. Producing documents, he testified that the fire alarm wires had been deliberately disabled. "This was no accident," he said firmly. "Someone made sure that system would never alert anyone the night of the fire." Gasps swept through the room again, the truth unraveling before everyone's eyes. Monica's composure shattered. She shot to her feet, pointing a trembling finger at Emily. "It's her!" "She's cursed. None of this would have happened if she hadn't been born." Her shriek echoed against the courtroom walls, her face twisted with rage. The gavel slammed down 3 times. Judge Whitaker rose, his voice like a hammer. "Order. This court will not tolerate cruelty toward a child. One more outburst and you will be removed in chains." Monica collapsed into her chair, her breath ragged, her eyes wild. With the evidence stacked high, the forged will exposed, the recording undeniable, the fire alarm tampered with, the verdict was inevitable. Judge Whitaker's voice rang through the chamber. "This court finds Monica Harper guilty of forgery, attempted fraud, and child abuse. She is sentenced to 7 years in prison. Frank Harper is stripped of inheritance rights and held financially responsible for damages, with leniency granted for his reluctant cooperation." The room erupted in murmurs, some sighs of relief, some heads shaking in dismay. Emily wept softly, but her tears were not of fear. They were the tears of release. Daniel reached for her, holding her close, and Max pressed his head against her leg as if sealing the bond. Justice, at last, had spoken. In the end, the story of Emily, Officer Daniel, and the loyal dog Max is not just about justice in a courtroom. It is about the quiet miracles that God still works in our lives when everything seems lost. A little girl who was once abandoned in the snow found not only a home, but also the courage to call a man Dad. That is no coincidence. That is grace. When we look around our own daily lives, we often forget that miracles do not always appear as flashes of light in the sky. Sometimes they are the steady arms that hold us when we cry, the loyal friend who never leaves, or the kindness of a stranger who decides to stand for truth. Every day, God places small sparks of hope in our path, and it is up to us to recognize them and protect them. If you believe, as I do, that no child should ever feel abandoned, and that God always has a plan even through suffering, then let this story be a reminder. Evil can shout loudly for a season, but it will never have the final word. Love, truth, and faith will always triumph in the end. I invite you now to share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever seen a moment in your own life that felt like a miracle, a sign that God was with you even in the darkest times? Write it down so others may be strengthened by your story too. And if you feel touched by Emily's courage and Daniel's love, I ask you to type one simple word in the comments: Amen. Let us join together as one community of faith, believing that God will continue to protect the innocent, heal the broken, and guide us all. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe so that these stories of hope can reach even more hearts. May God bless you, and may His light shine over your life and your family always. Amen.